Races that could decide the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. First, tonight's headlines, stories we're following at this hour. President Trump says the number of military troops deployed to the U.S.-Mexican border could go as high as 15,000. Also today, the president saying the right to citizenship for babies born to non-U.S. citizens on American soil will be ended one way or another. Stocks were up on Wall Street today, but not nearly enough to offset a terrible October for investors. We'll go through all the numbers shortly. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis are calling for a ceasefire in the Yemen civil war. But there are significant obstacles to ending the conflict between Iran-backed Yemeni rebels and a coalition led by Saudi Arabia. In America's election headquarters, new Fox News polls in some of the U.S. Senate races we're looking at. First, let's go to Missouri. We were just there talking to the incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill against Josh Hawley, the Attorney General Republican. Take a look at our poll. Tied 43-43. Each one of these states that we're looking at, also interesting to look at President Trump's approval rating. In this state, Missouri, 54% approve, disapprove in the state of Missouri. So that race extremely tight according to our polling. If we go out west to Arizona, Republican MarthaMacCallum, Democrat Kyrsten Sinema. As you take a look at this race, we also have it tied. The president's approval rating in Arizona, this is at 52-46. The president is not going out to Arizona in the last stops of his tour before Election Day. Then we go up to North Dakota. This race has really changed. The incumbent trying to hold on, Heidi Heitkamp against Kevin Kramer. Take a look. Kramer pulling away, 51-42 in our latest poll. One of the reasons is look at this approval rating for President Trump in North Dakota, 61-36. That makes a big difference on turnout in a state like North Dakota. In Tennessee, once thought to be very tight, where Marsha Blackburn is up against Phil Bredesen, former governor there. As we take a look at our poll, also Blackburn pulling away 50-41. The president's approval rating in Tennessee, 58% approve of President Trump's job in the state of Tennessee. And the last race we're looking at here is in Indiana, and this is an incumbent trying to hold on, Joe Donnelly against Mike Braun, the Republican. Here we have Donnelly with a 7-point lead. This is the Libertarian in that race with 5%. The president's approval rating in Indiana is 50-48. We're looking at this race very closely because it's one of the ones we'll look at Election Day. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is in Indiana to look at this Senate race.
In the final days, a Fox poll now shows a break in the Indiana Senate race, with Democrat Joe Donnelly suddenly pulling ahead. This just after a gaffe in the last Senate debate. The incumbent Democrat had a poor word choice that seemed to indicate he was surprised by good performance from minorities.
Our state director is Indian American, but he does an amazing job. Our director of all constituent services, she's African American, but she does an even more incredible job than you could ever imagine.
Donnelly said he misspoke. Social media was not forgiving. One tweet said he had some explaining to do. Another said his sloppy words are getting him a lot of negative press. Another said he's an idiot, but he's doing a horrible job. His Republican opponent was more forgiving, but saw a double standard.
And had it happened on the other side, I think it would be getting a lot more attention. And it was a gaffe similar to that cost the Republican the election.
He's referring to the 2012 flub by then GOP Senate candidate Richard Murdoch, who said sometimes pregnancy resulting from rape is something God intended. Observers say it cost the GOP the seat and elected Donnelly. Now Republicans want the seat back. The race had been tight with the two candidates very similar. Democrat Donnelly boasts that he is bipartisan, that he's voted with President Trump 62% of the time. He's pro-life and pro-gun. And he says he could be a uniter in a bitterly divided nation.
My job is truly to bring America together. That's what I'm trying to do.
The issue that tops the Hoosier agenda is health care. The difference between the candidates is that Donnelly emphasizes protection for pre-existing conditions. Braun wants to keep premiums under control. The sharpest divide came over the vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Donnelly said Kavanaugh did not have the temperament or impartiality for the court and voted against. That gave Braun an opening to call him a liberal, out of sync with Indiana.
The fact that he voted against the Kavanaugh nomination took any question out of where his allegiance is, and that's to Chuck Schumer.
Both parties are bringing out the big guns for this race. President Trump will be in Indianapolis on Friday, stumping for Braun. Fort Wayne on Monday. Former President Obama is traveling to Gary, Indiana, where he will stump for Donnelly on Sunday. Brett, back to you.
Mike Tobin in Indianapolis. Mike, thank you. We're going to look at one more Senate race before we turn over to the House of Representatives, and that's here in the state of Montana. Incumbent Jon Tester trying to hold off the Republican Matt Rosendale. The news here is not the polls. We don't have a new one. The average of polls has Tester up about 4 and change. The news is that the Libertarian Rick Breckenridge, polling at about 3% in the latest polls, got out of the race today. Said he's throwing all of his support to the Republican Matt Rosendale. Will that make a difference in this race? We don't know, but it's a development today in the Senate race in Montana. Now let's look at the House of Representatives. Our power rankings here. Need 218 to take the majority. Right now, as of tonight, Fox says that there are 29 toss-ups. These are the races that will really decide how the House goes. You see likely Democrats 192, lean 15, and here's 166, lean 33. Today, it looks like it's heading the Democrats' way. There is a lot of confidence on the Democrat side, including a very confident House Minority Leader saying she will be Speaker again. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel.
Election day may be next Tuesday, but House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi says it might as well be over.
What now I'm saying is we will win. We will win. We will win.
This is not the outcome we wanted.
That led late-night host Stephen Colbert to remind Pelosi about the last time when Democrats were supremely confident.
Please don't say that. Do you want to say that on Hillary's fireworks barge that she canceled?
Democrats will carry the House. If we have a bigger victory, the Senate governorships, it's going to be a great night for America.
Yet despite her role in trying to lead her party back to the majority, at least 46 Democrats on the ballot have said they won't support Pelosi for Speaker.
And that's because I think we need a new wave of leadership. I think we need new voices directing the conversation in Washington.
The unfinished business is...
In that environment, Pelosi has floated the idea of holding the Speaker's gavel short term.
I see myself as a transitional figure. You know, I mean, I have things to do, books to write, places to go, grandchildren first and foremost.
Pelosi and her allies have eagerly started laying out an agenda. Democrats would use their first month to make major changes to campaign and ethics laws, restrict gerrymandering of congressional districts, and require outside political groups to disclose their donors. Other key priorities Pelosi and her team are selling are lowering prescription drug costs, spending on clean energy, and building new infrastructure. What's missing is any mention of impeaching President Trump.
It is worth noting Republicans have been campaigning in many places against Pelosi becoming Speaker, hoping that will motivate folks to vote. So it'll be interesting to see if this bold prediction and rollout of an agenda could potentially backfire if voters say, not so fast. Brett?
All right, Mike, thank you. President Trump is tonight insisting he does have the legal authority to end birthright citizenship. And he's citing a 25-year-old comment by a powerful Democrat to back him up. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has that story tonight live from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
And there may be more military members headed south as well. Brett, the president upping the ante to stop that migrant caravan from coming into the United States, saying late this afternoon he's willing to put an additional 10,000 active duty troops on the border to assist the Border Patrol. And he continues to take aim at the issue of birthright citizenship. On his way out the door to begin a 5-day, 11-rally campaign blitz, President Trump today doubled down on his bet that he can end birthright citizenship for illegal immigrants with a stroke of his executive pen.
This is not a constitutional amendment. You don't need a constitutional amendment for birthright citizenship. I believe that you can have a simple vote in Congress, or it's even possible, in my opinion, this is after meeting with some very talented legal scholars, that you can do it through an executive order.
Earlier today, the president took issue with House Speaker Paul Ryan's assessment that it would take a lengthy congressional process to do it.
I think in this case, the 14th Amendment is pretty clear, and that would involve a very, very lengthy constitutional process.
In a tweet, the president firing back, Paul Ryan should be focusing on holding the majority rather than giving his opinions on birthright citizenship, something he knows nothing about.
All you have to do is take a look at what Harry Reid said in 1993. And guess what? Before he went insane, he got it right.
President Trump did applaud former Democratic Senator Harry Reid, who in 1993 introduced legislation to end birthright citizenship, rejecting it as a reward to lawbreakers.
No sane country would do that, right? Guess again. If you break our laws by entering this country without permission and give birth to a child, we reward that child with U.S. citizenship.
In a statement today, Reid said, "I made a mistake. After I proposed that awful bill, my wife Landra immediately sat me down and said, 'Harry, what are you doing? Don't you know that my father is an immigrant?'" But at least one Democrat fighting for his political life next Tuesday thinks ending birthright citizenship is worth pursuing.
In regards to birthright citizenship, that's the 14th Amendment of our Constitution. And so how this should be handled is by the Congress. And I heard you say that Lindsey Graham is going to put legislation forward. We have to take a look at that legislation.
Immigration will form a central part of the president's closing argument as he tries to hold control of the House and increase the margins in the Senate. The economy is another issue. At a workforce event this afternoon, the president pointed to volatility in the stock market, warning people's 401ks could be at stake.
They're waiting for the results of the midterms. And if the midterms, for some reason, don't do so well for Republicans, I think you're all going to lose a lot of money.
On birthright citizenship, White House officials tell Fox News that Congress has never passed a law granting citizenship to the children of illegal immigrants, and the Supreme Court has never issued a ruling on that particular aspect of the 14th Amendment. White House officials insist there is nothing in the Constitution that compels citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants, and that up until now, it has been more of a, quote, custom. Brett?
More on this with the panel. John Roberts on the North Lawn. John, thanks. The Federal Reserve wants to ease requirements on holding capital and cash for U.S. banks that are big but smaller than the Wall Street mega banks. They also want to relax the schedule for so-called stress tests that evaluate risk for banks. It's the Fed's latest proposal to lessen government oversight of financial firms, implemented after the 2008 economic crisis and subsequent recession. One holdout Fed governor says the moves could raise the risk of another taxpayer bailout of big banks. Strong quarterly results from Facebook and others helped drive another positive day on Wall Street. The Dow finishing up 241. The S&P 500 gained 29. The Nasdaq surged 144. The good Halloween results could not turn a wild month of October positive. The Dow lost 5 percentage points in October. The S&P 500 dropped nearly 7%. The Nasdaq was the worst of the major indices, losing more than 9%. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us with some analysis. Good evening, Susan.
Brett, it's the worst October since 2008, the global financial crisis, and worst month in years for the markets. Over $2 trillion have been lost on the markets in the month. That's roughly 10% of the U.S. economy. The big concerns for investors: higher interest rates, global trade tensions, and fears that corporate earnings may not look as good next year compared to this year. And the main stock drags have been the big technology players, the FANGs, as we call them: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Amazon, in fact, dipping into bear market territory this week, which means the stock was down over 20% from its recent peaks. Also, the overhang of the midterm elections has kept the markets in check. But historical trends over the past 70 years shows that no matter who wins the vote, markets tend to rally after the midterms, on average 12 to 15%. So some good news there. Brett, back to you.
Susan, thank you. Up next, new charges in the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in St. Louis has a vegetarian food maker asks a federal judge to issue a preliminary injunction against a Missouri law making it a crime to promote products as meat that are not made from livestock or poultry. The company claims the law infringes on its constitutional free speech rights to use product labels such as veggie burgers and vegetarian ham roast. The law was passed earlier this year with support from the Missouri Farm Bureau and state pork and cattle associations. Fox 2 in Detroit, as General Motors offers buyouts to about 18,000 white-collar workers in North America. The move coming on the same day GM reports $2.5 billion third quarter profits. GM says although it's performing well, it wants to continue to reduce costs while the company and the economy are strong. And this is a live look at Boston from our affiliate, WFXT. The big story there tonight, a huge party for the World Series champs. Players rode duck boats, a tradition. The Red Sox defeated the Los Angeles Dodgers 4-1 to win the Fall Classic. The Sox have won 4 World Championships in the last 15 seasons. Congratulations to Boston and Boston's fans. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. We now know what charges the suspect in the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre will face. Meanwhile, 3 more victims were laid to rest today. Correspondent David Lee Miller is in Pittsburgh tonight.
As mourners were paying their respects to the victims of Saturday's shooting rampage at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue, a federal grand jury today indicted the alleged gunman. Robert Bowers faces 44 counts, including hate crimes. Among the charges, 11 counts of obstruction of free exercise of religious beliefs, resulting in death, and 11 counts of use and discharge of a firearm to commit murder in relation to a crime of violence. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who will ultimately decide if Bowers will face the death penalty, called the alleged crimes, quote, incomprehensibly evil and utterly repugnant to the values of this nation. According to the indictment, Bowers was armed with 3 Glock 357 handguns and a Colt AR-15 rifle. 2 members of the congregation and 4 police officers were wounded. 3 remain in the hospital and continue to improve.
I think overall the prognoses are good now for all the patients, including the 3 that remain. But each of them, in a varying way, will have a different trajectory and likely require a series of ongoing care.
3 victims of the shooting were laid to rest today. 75-year-old Joyce Feinberg, 88-year-old Melvin Wax, and 69-year-old Irving Younger. The head of the Anti-Defamation League blames a 57% spike in acts of anti-Semitism in the last year, partly on the political climate.
People are anxious, people are on edge, people are tense, and that creates the conditions in which things are very combustible.
The alleged gunman, Robert Bowers, is due to appear in court again tomorrow. At that time, the prosecution says it will present some of the evidence against him. Brett.
David Lee Miller live in Pittsburgh. Thank you. 2 of the president's top advisors are calling for a ceasefire in the Yemen civil war. But it will take a lot more than just talk to end the conflict between Iran-backed Yemeni rebels and a coalition led by Saudi Arabia and supported by the U.S. State Department correspondent Rich Edson tells us why.
We need to be doing this in the next 30 days.
The United States wants the fighting in Yemen to stop and peace negotiations to begin.
We've admired this problem for long enough down there.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says it's time to address the conflict's underlying issues and points to both sides, including the U.S.-backed Saudi coalition, saying, quote, the time is now for the cessation of hostilities, including missile and UAV strikes from Houthi-controlled areas into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Subsequently, coalition airstrikes must cease in all populated areas in Yemen. The U.S. assists the Saudi coalition in its fight against Iranian-backed forces, refueling jets and providing intelligence. The State Department stresses the U.S. continues to support the right of Saudi Arabia to defend its borders. Thousands are dead in the nearly 4-year war. The United Nations calls the conflict the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with millions suffering from disease, starvation, and the violence of war. The U.S. pushes this ceasefire as congressional support for Saudi Arabia deteriorates following Jamal Khashoggi's murder in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
This needs to be solved now. There is no point in excuses. There is no point on saving some people.
Turkish media reports prosecutors there have determined Khashoggi was strangled as soon as he entered the consulate as part of a premeditated killing, and his body dismembered. Secretary Pompeo says the United States is still waiting to see where the facts in this case ultimately lead, though acknowledges that Saudi officials have got to get the facts out and that time is not on their side in doing so, nearly a month after Khashoggi's murder. Brett?
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Up next, our midterm previews continue with a governor's race that Republicans thought was safe and now does not appear to be. First, beyond our borders tonight, the newly elected governor of the southern Japanese island of Okinawa plans to visit the U.S. with a request that America stop construction of a disputed military base. Denny Tamaki tells the Associated Press the Marine base should be moved off the island and the American military presence on Okinawa should be reduced. Search crews are still trying to find the fuselage and the black box from that Indonesian jet that went down Monday, but they have recovered some of the debris from the disaster that killed all 189 people on board. Russia's space agency says an investigation has found a rocket carrying a crew to the International Space Station failed recently because of a sensor malfunction. The rocket carrying a NASA astronaut and a Russian cosmonaut failed 2 minutes into the October 11th flight, sending their emergency capsule into a sharp fall back to Earth. Both men were uninjured. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. What was thought to be the Republicans' best chance to pick up a governor's seat is now much less certain tonight. That's because what was a three-person race in Alaska is now a head-to-head battle, and the GOP candidate is said to be losing ground. Correspondent Dan Springer tells us about it from Anchorage.
How are you? Let me squeeze over there. Thank you.
Alaska's race for governor pitting former Democratic U.S. Senator Mark Begich.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming.
Against former state senator Republican Mike Dunleavy might appear conventional. It's not. Missing is the incumbent governor, Bill Walker, an independent who dropped out 12 days ago. So late his name will still appear on the ballot. The stunning move gave life to Begich, who polls showed was splitting the liberal and moderate vote with Walker.
It was hard in a three-way because people kind of looking at which one is the right one, but now it's changed, and there's huge momentum.
Governor Walker bailed 3 days after his lieutenant governor and running mate resigned abruptly after making an inappropriate comment to a woman. Walker then threw his support to Begich, who, like him, is open to new taxes and lowering oil and gas fund dividend checks to every Alaskan in order to close a huge budget deficit. Dunleavy says he can do it by cutting spending and would consider trimming Medicaid, which added $44,000 to the insured. Alaskans are used to bizarre elections. Icon Ted Stevens was only defeated because of a federal corruption guilty verdict a week before the vote. Senator Lisa Murkowski lost her 2010 Republican primary, then retained the seat with a stunning write-in victory. Mike Dunleavy appeared to be cruising to an easy win before the shakeup, but seems unfazed by the new Walker-Begich alliance.
Both of these guys were running to the far left to begin with. We designed our race against running against an individual that would be on the left, and right now things are working well.
The Republican Governors Association is still confident, but a lot less so than just a couple of weeks ago. They know they'll lose some of the current 33 governor seats they have in next Tuesday's election, but they've always viewed Alaska as their best chance for a pickup. Brett?
Dan Springer with a gorgeous backdrop in Anchorage. Dan, thanks. In Alaska and almost everywhere else in the country, health care is one of, if not the most important issue. And many Democrats in House races are pushing for a major step toward a single-payer system. Tonight, correspondent Leland Vittert tells us what that may mean for you and your family.
We must end the international embarrassment of the United States of America being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care.
In addition to Bernie Sanders, 120 members of the House Democratic Caucus have co-sponsored a Medicare for All bill.
Are we going to move America forward and bring finally health care for every citizen of the United States of America?
According to a recent Fox poll, 46% of registered voters agree, saying they want the government to pay Americans' health care tab. But that would come with a big price tag.
They're going to be horrified. To finance Medicare for All with tax increases would reduce household income by 19%.
A George Mason University study puts the cost of Medicare for All at $32.6 trillion over the next 10 years. Put in perspective, that could buy 2,500 new aircraft carriers for the Navy.
I want to ask those people, How the hell does it happen that we spend twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other nation?
In the Senate, 15 co-sponsor Sanders' bill, among them 2020 presidential prospects Cory Booker, Christian Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren.
A majority of Democrats on the ballot for Congress have already signed up for a government takeover of health care that would obliterate Medicare.
While Republican and Democratic politicians have radically different views of health care policy and solutions, voters in both parties agree on its importance, ranking it among the top 3 issues this election. Brett.
Leland, thank you. We are less than a week from the midterms. We'll talk about the stretch run with the panel after a quick break. This is a Fox News alert. President Trump arriving in Fort Myers, Florida, waving to the crowd. Just got off Air Force One there. You see Governor Rick Scott of Florida, who's running for Senate there, and Air Force One. The pool is now racing to their car to get in the motorcade to follow him to this event in Fort Myers. This is a final campaign blitz. The president is going to be traveling to 11 cities in 8 states over the next 6 days. Do the math here. And you can see all of the places he's going. He's actually going to states that he won in 2016. Many of them he won by a lot. And he is trying to shore up not only House races, but Senate races, and in some cases, governor's races, like in Florida, with the case of Ron DeSantis, who's running for governor against Mayor Gillum from Tallahassee. Let's bring in our panel. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Hugo Gurdon, editorial director of the Washington Examiner. Okay, Molly, first, the president and how much he factors in. You know, we have new Fox polls out tonight, and this is the president's job approval performance in these states. Number 6, North Dakota, Tennessee, Missouri, Arizona, and Indiana. Look at the approval numbers in North Dakota and Tennessee. Both races where Republicans are pulling away in that Senate race. He is on the ballot, as he said, in a lot of these places.
Yeah, and it certainly helps the Republicans that he's above water in this favorability testing. You mentioned North Dakota, where he's ahead. That race looks like it's done. Tennessee looks like it's done. The Missouri race and the Arizona race, which you have as tied, well, that's got to be troubling or at least it shows Republicans have a strong chance of taking those seats. If Claire McCaskill is tied at this point in the race in a state that Donald Trump took by a large margin, and she's been campaigning very hard, but to not be above her opponent there is probably not where she wants to be at this point in the race. And
there is that race, 43-43. The other one you mentioned was Arizona, and we have that at 46-46. Kyrsten Sinema and MarthaMacCallum. I guess Arizona and Nevada are where Democrats are seeing a lot of hope, A.B.
Right, but those races are still so close. I mean, it's been looking good for Senator Heller, the incumbent, until this mayor's poll out today in Nevada, where Congresswoman Rosen is ahead. That's been a big surprise and a disappointment to Democrats. That, without Latinos, is not so much of a purple state. So do Latinos vote in midterms? Not usually. Is the Harry Reid infrastructure left over from when he last won there? That was really an impressive operation he put together. Is that going to be activated against Heller? I wouldn't be confident if I were the Democrats there. And Arizona, I think, is going to be the closest race of the night.
In Arizona, Hugo, they have early voting, and they're seeing tremendous numbers. I mean, really high. Yeah. Across the country, 40% of the people will have voted already by Election Day, and Republicans in state by state are performing pretty well in the early vote.
Yeah, they certainly are, and I think this is going to be very encouraging to the Republicans. Normally, early voting has been something about which more Republicans have expressed skepticism. Democrats have, it's been very popular amongst Democrats. To see Republicans performing well, and as you say, it's across the country in the early voting, is obviously going to be cheering Republicans already.
All right, on the issue of health care, we just ran that piece. Right. Take a listen to the president and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders.
Republicans will always protect Americans with pre-existing conditions.
The president's saying, we Republicans, we strongly support making sure that pre-existing conditions are covered. lie.
How the hell does it happen that we spend twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other nation?
You know, the Kavanaugh situation changed the dynamic. It seems like across the board, Democrats are really hitting health care as much or more than Republicans hit it when Obamacare was at its early stages.
Right, you can tell a lot about what actually motivates voters by what is happening in the ads, and you see Democratic ads really focusing on health care and Republicans trying to also focus on health care. Medicare for all or free health care always is going to poll pretty well because people generally like free goodies from the government. It goes less well when you actually have the political considerations. I mean, when you look at that really huge red wave that you saw in 2010, that was a response to that test of whether the government should take over a massive part of the economy in the healthcare scenario. So it's a complicated thing, but it's certainly effective political messaging at the end, and it is interesting what people are focusing on and what they're not.
Maybe.
Democrats have focused on health care all along. Republicans promised again and again and again for cycle after cycle to repeal and replace it, and they couldn't. They didn't improve it. They got rid of the individual mandate in their tax law this year. That has made the pools sicker and the coverage more expensive. People know Republicans did not come up with an answer on this. They know the president's not telling the truth. This has been an issue in their ads for Democrats the entire campaign. Not impeachment, not immigration, health care. It is the sleeper issue. Republicans are panicked about it. If they take the House back, it'll be because of health care.
Hugo, I asked each of you to pick a race.
Yeah.
Which race did you pick?
I picked West Virginia, and that might surprise some people because the likelihood, the almost certainty, is that Joe Manchin will win. The reason why West Virginia is interesting is that it was won massively by President Trump. And at the moment, the Real Clear Politics average puts Manchin ahead by 12 points. But if that falls to below, into single figures, it could suggest that the Republicans have great chance in the states that President Trump won in 2016. And that could mean Florida, it could mean Indiana, it could mean Arizona. And Missouri.
He's going to Huntington, West Virginia, and we don't have the number here, but we assume the approval rating is much like North Dakota, which is the president at 61% approval in North Dakota. Okay, Molly, your race.
I chose California 39. This is an open seat, and it's one of many open seats that will be key to the Democrats actually retaking the House if they're able to do that. What's interesting about this is had Ed Royce not vacated this seat or announced he wasn't going to run again, almost certainly he would have kept it. It's now a toss-up. I think it's a good reminder that a lot of Republicans bought into the hype that this was going to be a blue tsunami, that it was going to be devastating. It was going to be just like President Obama's first midterm where so many seats were lost. And because they bought into that hype, those are actually some of the most vulnerable seats, and maybe a good reminder that people should be more cautious about believing things like that.
Yeah, it is shifting because of the House suburban districts. A lot of the toss-ups we have leaning a little bit more Democratic now, so they're close to the 218 number. AB.
I chose the Arizona Senate race, and at Real Clear Politics, we now have that with all the new polling down to 0.8% lead for Sinema, so not a big one.
And we have it tied at 46.
And you have it tied. So this, like I said, I think this could be the closest election of the night. I think this race is so fascinating. These two women are both moderates. McSally, an Air Force fighter pilot, colonel in the Air Force, is not running as a moderate. She chose not to. Republicans in Arizona are no longer the Republicans of John McCain or Jeff Flake. And so she's running harder to the right, while Sinema has told independent voters, I'm for border security, I'm not a liberal on immigration, I'm not a proud Democrat, and she's run as a moderate. They're both incredibly ambitious people. Sinema has these controversial statements in the past, which I think could end up depressing independent vote, but she's way up with independents, and that could be key to her victory.
What's interesting is the ads are trying to point each other as extremes.
They've called each other liar and treasonous. It's been as ugly as it gets.
McSally said that saying that it's okay to work for the Taliban against U.S. troops is not something you should do. I don't think that's the same as calling someone
I'm just saying they're both members of the bipartisan House Problem Solvers Caucus, and they're at each other's throats. It's as ugly as it could have gotten. And again, so interesting that they're actually moderates, but one of them chose not to run as one, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as a result of that.
Yeah, the president is not stopping in Arizona on his final trek, so we'll see. Next up, President Trump still insists he does have the power to end birthright citizenship. That debate is continuing. If
making it easy to be an illegal alien isn't enough, how about offering a reward for being an illegal immigrant? No sane country would do that, right? Guess again. If you break our laws by entering this country without permission and give birth to a child, we reward that child with U.S. citizenship and guarantee of full access to all public and social services this society provides. And that's a lot of services.
All you have to do is take a look at what Harry Reid said in 1993. And guess what? Before he went insane, he got it right.
The President of the United States heading out to Florida, referencing that Senator Reid, the former Democratic leader in the Senate, put out a statement today in which he said, in 1993, I made a mistake. After I proposed that awful bill, my wife Landra immediately sat me down and said, Harry, what are you doing? Don't you know that my father is an immigrant? She set me straight. Immigrants are the lifeblood of our nation. This president wants to destroy, not build, to stoke hatred instead of unify. He can tweet whatever he wants while he sits around watching TV. But he's profoundly wrong. The issue, of course, is birthright citizenship and where this goes and what this means for this election. We're back with our panel. Hugo.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see Harry Reid making that statement in 1993 and then saying that he's made a mistake. And of course, he wants to stoke animus towards President Trump. But I think that the Democrats are probably overreaching, and a lot of people are overreaching, if they think that there is wholesale support across the country for birthright citizenship as it applies to illegal immigrants. I don't think there are many people who wouldn't say anyone who's on a path to citizenship and they have a child in the country, that child will become a citizen. But I think that if someone is gaming the system and they can come into the country and by doing so and having a baby here, that they can then make sure that their child has citizenship and from that the family can get citizenship, I think President Trump is probably onto something which is probably a popular view.
I mean, the president says he's talked to legal scholars, AB. There are many legal scholars and others who say you just can't do it by executive order. If he did it by executive order, it would immediately be challenged, and it would be a decision by the Supreme Court. That's where the debate is, but what this means now is really about the election.
Bret, President Trump's basket of campaign goodies overfloweth. It started with a fake tax cut that didn't exist. He's gone on to bringing 5,000 troops to the border. He's ratcheting that up potentially to 15,000. It could be 40,000 by Tuesday morning. And he's got birthright citizenship. It's not that it's not popular, as Hugo says, or that it wouldn't, that a constitutional amendment wouldn't pass and Americans wouldn't favor it. And I'm not at all surprised to see tape of Harry Reid once being on that side on immigration, just like we've seen old tape of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. The party's gone completely to the other side, from civil rights to a focus on immigration rights that is absolutely out of the mainstream of this country, as well as President Trump, who's also out of the mainstream of this country on immigration. But it's the process that you talk about. The idea of throwing this out there when it sounds ridiculous and there is no tax cut and people are calling the border deployment a stunt is just.
Although his defense secretary said he doesn't do stunts, but
it's a tough thing for Republicans going into to this election. It's something that could be debated later. He could have had a passing opinion. It requires a constitutional amendment. That's what all the scholars say. He's just throwing it out there to make a headline.
I mean, you're jumping. I'm going to get there, Molly. I'm going to get there.
I think reminding people about large structural issues like views on whether borders mean anything is not a horrible campaign strategy, but it also is the type of thing that, depending on how the election goes on Tuesday, that will have ramifications on how we handle these issues. And it's also worth remembering that the very first position paper that Donald Trump put out in August 2015 called for an end to birthright citizenship. The question on executive orders is interesting because, of course, the Constitution gives Congress the authority to determine how to do this, how to handle immigration. But there are executive orders that could be constitutional and executive orders that wouldn't be. If he usurps the Congress, that would be unconstitutional. If he tells
like Barack Obama with DACA.
Sure. If he
However, the president acknowledged today that if he can do it, why can't I? Republicans said, no, you can't do it. That's why they fought in court.
He shouldn't, but if he tells executive agencies don't go beyond what Congress has authorized, that's a perfectly legitimate executive order. So we have to wait and see what the actual words are.
It's perfectly clear that if he tries to use an executive order, it will get challenged all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court will then make a decision on it. But it hasn't actually adjudicated on the children of illegal immigrants. And, by raising the issue now, 6 days before the election, he's reminding people of one of his key issues and one of the reasons why they voted for him and why they might vote for Republicans.
There was one tweet, very quickly. Paul Ryan should be focusing on holding the majority rather than giving his opinion on birthright citizenship, something he knows nothing about. Our new Republican majority will work on this, closing the immigration loopholes, securing our border. Talking about the House Speaker saying you can't do it by executive order. Molly, 6 days before the election, the guy's out there raising money for House Republicans.
Well, yeah, but it's also true that Republicans need to understand that their base very much cares about this issue, and they're very frustrated that Republicans haven't done anything about it. And this is something that it would be wise for all Republicans to care about that.
All right, when we come back, a sweet end to this show. Finally tonight, happy Halloween. People around this time of year, election time, very skeptical of polls. There are a lot of them out there. I get it all the time. But what do you think of this poll? The ultimate Halloween candy power ranking. Reese's Peanut Butter Cup takes first place, followed by their miniatures. Twix gets the bronze. Kit Kat takes fourth. Snickers rounds out the top 5. Coming in last, dead last, Good and Plenty. Whether you agree with that poll or not, Reese's, the company, has a way for you to get rid of any unappealing candy for a sweet reward.
This is low-rent candy. I don't even want this.
They have a candy converter that you put the candy in there and you get Reese's back. And it's not in my neighborhood. Anyway, maybe it's in Martha's neighborhood. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Here's Martha.
I'm not taking any bad candy and giving away Reese's. And I agree on the Good and Plenty, except I don't like anything miniature. I like the large size whenever possible. Good to see you, Bret. Thank you.